So in the last lecture, I mainly just kind of introduced us to the thought of Africa and the way that people like Hegel or Europeans disregarded even that Africa had a history. That was the extreme end of it. Um, Africa, though, has always been a diverse continent, and I think by anyone's standards, you would not have anyone saying that Africa that doesn't have a history. Islam was also not indigenous of Africa, but Islam early on plays a major role in Africa, mainly in the north, western, and eastern parts of Africa. Okay, keep in mind that right here we have Egypt, we have the Middle East over here in Arabia, where Islam comes from, and Islam, and its inception, quickly takes root in the north and eastern parts of Africa, and then kind of spreads throughout. Central and South Africa were mainly stateless societies and had local deities. And stateless, we're talking about maybe tribal, okay? So there would be some sort of social order, but not like the way we think of like a state. Like Egypt did have a state. And again, I think this is also some of the things that made Europeans think of Africans not having history. If they didn't see a big nation state with a king and a large military, it didn't count. That society wasn't a real society according to like some of the way that maybe societies with literature or states would view them. Ethiopia was dominated by Christians, not from European missionaries, actually from missionaries coming from Egypt. And I have a video that I might be able to post here for you on just discussing the fact that Ethiopia becomes Christian about the same time that Rome does. And it evolves in a very different way. But Egypt and Ethiopia are long major standing Christian nations. And I like if you are not aware of that, you're really missing out on an important part of Christian history that's often neglected in Western-centric studies of history. So I just thought to mention that. There was always pockets of Jews and sometimes possibly even Berber people or people in the north that converted to Judaism. There's a Berber princess in the north that her name was Kina, and she is believed by many to have been Jewish, maybe a Jewish convert. Judaism took hold in Ethiopia, and there's some other tribes that claim to go back to Judaism, like the Limba people. So, and later on, as Christian Europe expels Jews, so like in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and they also expelled every Muslim and every Jewish person if they didn't convert, many of the Jews would go into North Africa. Even sometimes in Spain, right here, when Islamic regimes were becoming more harsh and less tolerant, you have stories of Jewish scholars or just Jewish subjects fleeing into Northern Africa. So just pointing that out. And you have many different languages and cultures coming out of Africa to a point that it becomes difficult, especially in a class like this, to be so brief, because looking at all these different cultures and peoples with different languages, really hard to talk about. While if I talk about Judaism, Christianity, or Islam in Africa, that might be easier for you to kind of latch on to mentally because you have some familiarity with them. But needless to say, Africa is a very, very diverse continent still to this day, with a lot of different ways of doing things. And might I add, doing Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in ways that many Christians, Muslims, and Jews are like not so familiar with or comfortable with even. Okay, So there's that diversity there. And I'm going to talk about this in the next lecture. I'm going to actually go into the issue of literacy and in Africa and Egypt. And Islam. So I'll start that in the next lecture.